Really? You know, these guys who invented what every day. The start, probably oriented protein and that kind of thing, but you know, it was with his original idea. And she spoke. Each has access to some hidden state, and that is that term. So, 30 years ago, one thing that you find. So it's got the dominant methodology. You know, his name is just like. When they think about it, really, it's not what the guy who made it or thought it up. It's not what he meant. And this guy's still around as well. I mean, came back, and there's a lot more than this. But he thought of objects like biological cells or state.
I just sounds like Erlang.
Yeah, I guess like Erlang. This way. So I guess before I get any further, I mean, the reason why I'm doing this talk, lots of complexities, and maybe ask a requirement, it's you know, those kinds of things. I think you've got different pressure on you. So when people argue about design and this kind of different. So there's a book coming out by Sam. It's not is that design is actually going to have to change. Sustainable and future, then not to have too many things depend on it. Kind of obvious, but it's hard to do in practice. He did a talk on something called. So I'd love to follow up on that with another talk. But the arrow they've drawn in, you know, high quality acid, A, B, C, D. This was the design. How they relate. The general idea here is that you don't expose that data all the way out. You try and think about telling people rather than asking for the data. Because it goes and does it, you don't have to know it does it. So what do you do? But Bob Martin put the between you. So they spell the word solid. So what does that mean? It means don't give it two responsibilities or three. If you do that, then it only has one reason to change, right? So if it another one, there's different ways of saying the same thing. I mean, how do you change it without changing it? An example there is you fork a project on, but you could instead just if you pass into it rather than hard coding inside that method. But if you have an object, and you should still be able. You shouldn't. So I won't go into these. But I thought it was you shouldn't increase. Interface segregation. You could pass in so a word and do this and getting it back on like the heavyweight approaches and everything. This is what some of the audiences said. They said no. As a developer said no, it makes it harder to test. We could have a separate object that didn't have any active record in it. It's really easy to things that you have to do. And if it's quite there, it doesn't matter. Think about this, DHH. So last way, Rails is not your application. That's complete. If you're building a web app, of course it is. So I don't know. This is open to discussion. You know, a lot of people around right now are
don't have opinions. It just is.
Want to get his apps really, really nice. Sort of situation. And they can keep it small. They can say, you know, that feature for other clients, you don't have a choice. So I kind of always take, sorry, yeah, and yes, I always design simpler because you make your features simpler. Yeah. If you have to do something complex, then what do you do? And then I stop listening to you. If you expose your active records out to your controllers and everywhere else about your system, then it's almost an infinite protocol. You could be called in any way, exposing it out. So earlier when I talked about the data, this is just, but there's a couple. There's been different approaches. Yeah, it's all about the mess. Basically, said, okay, my app's pretty complicated in these areas, and I'd like to separate it, or move that from the separate. This guy called Corey, if anyone's on Twitter, following him in Ruby, you've probably seen him around. He's all the faster tests and better design. He does it in a way that's really, really cool. You know, he's done a presentation on how to do it. So I've recently just made, and maybe your logic is unrelated. In the section of your persistent objects, you often find business rules. That's your third party playing Ruby Office and active record mode, right? A lot of times I think we forget that, right? We just think we've got to have, if we've got some complexities, there's probably something managed, right? It's not necessarily, maybe just have a standard Rails app and you just Abdi's book, so on Rails, he a plain blog model, he adds in a bit of active model, he adds in a bit more, and then he ends up. At that time when he does that, he realizes, that. So he talks about fig leaf approach. Is that you hide all the act model methods that you inherit. So if the class went and called find on your main class, it would just throw an exception, doesn't it? So it would do this from the start. Another way is main object approach. White. I love indirection, except me lays indirection. That's a good point. That sounds like a good thing sometimes makes you think it's good. He says he hates the disconnect between design patterns and ideas and the acts of guiding force here, right? But here, make it better, simple code, file through, unfortunately. He says you absolutely must find the first thing you're reading when you system. It's not. That's wrong. And that's the point. Anybody else has any ideas? Maybe that's next
Maybe
one.
that's I'm a bit like that. It's something to me on Michael and put on the website.
Like it's not fully answered the answer because
it's that we do it for example.
okay.
Yeah. So I'll do it essentially.
Is Leon read that original docs? He goes in and says that's a really good pattern.
The religious number of kind of structures or a bit of buzz. I think there's an amount of dogma
As well.
That's
so
right.
what used to be really 6 months ago.
You have to feel the pain.